I'm Beatrice Galilee. I'm a curator, writer, and my main focus of my attention has been architecture. I trained as an architect, and since pretty much my whole career, I've been thinking about writing about architecture and different ways of presenting architecture, and that took me from biennales, curating biennales, to setting up my own institution in London, to being the first architecture and design curator at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And now finally, I've now set up my own institution, nonprofit institution here in New York called The World Around. The important thing about the World Around Summit is that it is annual. So we have this kind of ability to create almost like a time capsule of contemporary architectural conversations and discourse. And so what we do when we're curating the program is look at all of the most interesting projects from the previous year. And so the summit itself is kind of a mixture of things that are just finished, that are kind of under construction, or are like long-term projects. So that's why we say now, near, next. It's like, it has this kind of immediacy of like, this is what's happening right now. And then my hope is that, in 10 years that we'll have this archive of practice, this kind of time capsule of like how architecture changed over this time, or what was consistent over this time. We'll have all of these singular projects, because everybody presents one single project. We don't ask people to speak about their entire practice. And that also has this temporal opportunity for us, where it's really bite size. Everyone talks about one thing that they just completed, and it's the story of the project. So it's the story of, I was invited by a client to respond to this need, this gap, this hope, this aspiration, and I responded, and my team responded with this. And then here were our challenges along the way. And then here's the final thing. And here's how it has reacted, and how people have responded to it. And to me, that's a story of architecture that we don't often encounter in exhibitions. We don't often encounter, the public doesn't often encounter, because they don't read architecture websites and architecture magazines. And so this kind of storytelling about architecture allows, I think it introduces in a very public way what I find so amazing and fascinating about architecture, which is all of these forces and components that have to be considered when making and thinking about contemporary architecture. I think that because we have a very unique perspective on contemporary architecture, and we include artists, authors, video makers, filmmakers. So the program isn't a series of building. It's a bit more fluid, dynamic. There's different perspectives on what we present as architectures now, near, and next. So I think that for all of the famous names, so this year we have Tadao Ando, David Chipperfield, very familiar, arguably famous names, but we also have maybe more completely maybe new names, and introducing new people to the audience who maybe would never encounter these types of practices or these type of people. And I think it's really great that everybody gets the same amount of time, regardless of whether you're Tadao Ando or whether you're an emerging young female practitioner. It's all the same. Everybody gets the opportunity to tell their story in the same way. And so I think people like that. I have heard that people like that sense of surprise, that you don't always know exactly what the next project's gonna be. Architecture and design, I think it's something that many artists are, respond to, consider, integrate, and have a lot to say. And I think that, especially for me as an architecture curator, it's very easy for me to step back and say what I find interesting about architecture. And it's harder for architects to do that. It's quite a skill, no, to be able to step back and say, this is interesting, this is challenging, this is like, I can put all these different things together. And I think artists, authors, people who are outside of the making line of architecture actually really contribute to that discussion in a very powerful way. The clients of architects are as important as the architects. I think the people writing about the projects and reflecting on them can be as influential and as powerful. And we have to kind of think about architecture as part of an ecosystem where other players can also speak and can also have an opinion. And I think that's where I see it, that we all have to fold in other voices and get stronger. My perspective about the next is that, it's only really education that we can look to. And one of the interesting things about the program this year is that we have a lot of people creating new pedagogies, like entirely new educational positions and programs where the next generation will be, looking and thinking completely differently than the way I was taught architecture, in a very conventional, kind of patriarchal way. And I think the next generation of architecture students, of design students, are being taught by Formafantasma. They're being taught by Leslie Loco. Ursula Bierman is setting up a university. We have, so many insightful and, really broad thinking people are teaching the next generation. And that, I think, that is exciting. When I think about Formafantasma's Geo Design Studio, like that sounds exciting to me. When I think about Leslie Loco and the African Futures Institute, that sounds exciting. That sounds like the future. And I think that's where I think that the next, like, really is, like, really genuinely is found in education and found in the next generation. Because the world around is essentially, I think of it like a nervous system. We need a host in order to kind of realize ourselves. So it's really important for us to find host collaborators, and we've been working with Guggenheim Museum in New York all through 2021. And then halfway through 2021, Eric and I had a conversation, and he asked if there was some way that we could get his new position as director at the Het Nova Institute. Maybe there was a way that we could collaborate. And so we were actually doing 2 programs together with them next year, with Eric and his team. And the first one is in the summit in January. So we're going to be in person at the Guggenheim, but Eric will be there as well. And we kind of co-curated the program. And then we will do another event in June the 11th in Rotterdam. So we'll have a kind of 2-part program with them, which is really exciting. I think that the world around kind of can help a little bit, because their institution, I've worked for the Met, it is one of the biggest institutions in the world. And I understand how institutions work, and they don't work the same way that a very small, nimble, nonprofit, research-based organization like the World Around does. They work slowly. There are checks and balances, there are approvals, there are very long lead times, there are all of these things. And it's also very hard to, for something like the Guggenheim right now, they don't have an architecture curator. So putting on an architectural program for the public requires a lot of expertise, and a very, which is not, there's not that many architecture curators. And so what we do is sort of help, we're basically helping in some way. It's sort of a reciprocal relationship, because while we get to use the Guggenheim Auditorium, which is like, amazing, and we get to use the, be associated with that incredible institution and that brand, we're also contributing to their history, because they have this amazing history with architecture. The Frank Lloyd Wright building, with this Guggenheim museums all around the world. So with HNI, it's the same. We will be working with them on the program, and we can provide all of the graphics and the filmmaking and the editing and the curatorial, and we will then generate this kind of audience for them and with them. So yeah, I think it's, you know, I understand why it's very hard for institutions to put on contemporary architecture programming because I tried and it's very hard. So I think that what we try to do with the World Around is to make that easier and offer ourselves, you know, as an institution that can provide that for other institutions. So we're more like a platform, and we can sort of plug in. So Radical Architecture of the Future is a book that tries to speak about the projects that, if we followed these projects, these people, maybe, you know, our perspective of architecture would change. We wouldn't necessarily think about architecture as something just bricks and mortar, but we can also think about architecture as a way of thinking. And there's just many different ways of thinking about what contemporary architecture might be and the form it might take. And so the book explores like people like Donna Haraway or Timothy Morton as people that contribute to architecture because of the way they think, and the way that they think that affects the way that the way that people design and the way we contribute to the conversation about contemporary architecture and design. I mean, to me, diversity is like just a bare minimum, you know, it's just like the absolute least that we can contribute. You know, it's absolutely fundamental to everything that we do, that there is a global spread, that there is a good number of females and non-females, and, you know, it's just, there's racial diversity, you know, it's ethnic diversity. It's really, really important to us. And I do think it's the absolute bare minimum that we can offer. I think that not only is it fundamental, but it's kind of everything. The alternative is so boring, and so, you know, it's like I'm so bored of hearing the same voices, and it's super important to offer surprising voices, to offer you know, different perspectives, whether that's trying to explain the value of like peatlands in Tierra del Fuego, and understanding that, you know, like, to me, the conversation about contemporary architecture has been fixated, like obsessively fixated on cities, on growth, you know, on production, development, and urbanism. And a lot of what you know, we're finding with this sort of annual event is like, that is there, the actual, the thing that holds up all of that is land, is like the rest of the planet, and the rest of the planet is suffering, and we have to be able to kind of put those two things together. We have to be able to talk about peatlands and wetlands and forests, and we have to talk about the rights of other living entities in the world. It's not, architecture is not divorced from those things. It's so, you know, it's so obvious, but somehow it kind of helps to repeat and repeat and repeat and say, actually, you know, like we have to take this seriously. We have to talk about the effects of colonization on the rest of the world. We can't just keep focusing on the West and the practice of the West as the kind of bottom line normality. It has to be, you know, absolutely diffused and readdressed, and the balance needs to be readdressed. I think from my architectural education, I was always interested in how economics affects architecture, how you know, how life affects architecture, how architecture affects life, how all of these other forces, politics, planning, you know, economics, art practices, design, materials, the life of materials. You know, I think it's so important to be able to see which is why we call it the world around. You know, it's like it's not just us. You know, it's the world around. I think it's something I've always put in my practice. So when I did my first ever Architecture Biennale was in 2009 in Shenzhen Architecture Biennale. And I had actually Bjarke Ingels contributed, and he did a parkour program with some Danish parkour artists, collaborated with some Chinese parkour artists, and when they did a performance, I had like some friends who just set up an architecture studio, made as an exhibition, they made a kind of trade fair stand selling ideas and business proposals. You know, so all through my architectural curatorial practice, I've been interested in performance, in display techniques, in different ways of thinking and presenting architecture. It's been something that has always been with me. It's very much part of my practice, you know, so I think it's just very natural. So just very natural for me to find these things and put them together and see kind of what hangs together and works.